President of the United States.
Mike Pence?
You guys in the media,
you
guys in the MSNBC crack me up to sort of create a hypothetical situation to say, if you had been vice president, what would you have been doing? I'm telling you exactly what I've been doing, but you're saying, but that's not what Donald Trump was doing. This is
Mike
a
Pence
joke.
asked you,
Let's actually have a substantive conversation. Do you want to have a substantive conversation about what should have happened, or do you want to play a game of gotcha? Because you have the choice. The choice is yours. Do you actually want to have a substantive conversation? If you do, I'm down to do it.
A few moments later.
Which falsehood would you like me to address? The financial one or the one about my views on affirmative action? Because I can go in whichever order you'd like.
On
the financial piece of it. Not at the time that I had applied for the scholarship that fall.
Yes, you did.
That December.
Yes, you did, Vivek. This is awkward for you because you did. I've got the tax returns in front of my face.
No, it's not awkward for you. Yes, on December 31st, when the application for the scholarship was that October. Mehdi, you're wasting your time on childish details in October of that year when I applied for that scholarship. And it was, well, guess what? The bonuses that a hedge fund pays, and it's a shame that, again, you don't have to be an expert on this, but if you're going to spout out, you better know something about it. People pay at a hedge fund the bonuses at the end of a year. And on December 31st, that's when I was paid. I applied for the scholarship that September, and I did not grow up in a wealthy family. Well, you know what the fact is, Mehdi, is $50,000 did make a big difference to me back then. And anybody who has a few $100,000 in the bank is going to take $50,000 without strings attached. Take the scholarship. But my question for you is, why on earth are you, as an intelligent person interested in politics, obsessing over a 24-year-old's $50,000 scholarship?
I'm interested in truth,
It would seem beneath you.
We have a country to fix. That you wear. And I'm interested in truth.
And Mehdi, that's why I released 20 years. Mehdi, that is why I released 20 years of tax records. Tell your friends in the Biden administration to do the same thing. Tell your Democrat candidates to do the same thing.
We've gone over time.
We're breaking precedents, and I think it is pathetic. I just think it is sad and pathetic that that we have important issues to talk about for the future of a country, and you're talking about a $50,000 scholarship in 2010 to go to Yale Law School when I was 24.
If you just owned
this is pathetic, and is why nobody trusts you guys.
It is pathetic, and you.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy. This is probably one of the most heated debates that I've seen in a long time. Okay, and this is between Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running for president, okay, in the GOP primary, and Mehdi Hasan, who is a liberal MSNBC host. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy has basically been debating in and everybody who wants to debate or interview him. And I'm telling you guys, I've watched almost all of them. And this man is starting to get pissed, okay? He's starting to get pissed off. And the reason why he's getting pissed off, I understand why he's getting pissed off, is because you have people who are clearly ignorant on certain topics that are asking him questions about topics that they know nothing about in a way that clearly shows that they're ignorant to anybody who knows anything about the topic. But yet they're presenting it as if Vivek is some type of fraud or consman or snake oil salesman, when clearly they're trying to take advantage of people's ignorance. For example, I watched an interview in which Vivek was asked, why does BlackRock, Morgan Stanley, and other investment firms whose jobs literally is to invest in companies, why do they own large stakes or a large amount of shares in his company, Roivant, right? I mean, and that's a question that anybody with any basic level of knowledge on financial markets and how mutual fund companies and asset management works would understand, that the reason why a company like Vanguard or State Street or Fidelity or BlackRock or Charles Schwab, okay, T. Rowe Price, I can name so many of these companies. But the reason why these mutual fund companies, for example, like a Vanguard, are the top shareholders, or they own a significant portion of basically every publicly traded company in the United States, is literally because people give Vanguard their money to invest that money into these companies. A very simple example of what I'm talking about on a small scale. The Vanguard S&P 500. That is a fund that tracks the top 500 publicly traded companies in the United States. So when somebody gives Vanguard $100,000 to put into their S&P 500 fund, Vanguard is going to take that money and they're going to invest that money in the top 500 publicly traded companies in the United States, so that that person's $100,000 is spread out over those 500 companies. Now, extrapolate that to trillions of dollars in the case of a company like Vanguard, who has trillions of dollars in asset under management. Now you can easily see why they own such a large portion of these companies in the United States. And publicly traded companies don't have a choice in regards to if Vanguard or BlackRock or whatever mutual fund company or even an individual is the largest shareholder, hence why they are publicly traded. Okay, you guys remember Twitter, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, how Elon Musk gave them an offer that basically the board of directors literally had to accept because it was their fiduciary responsibility to essentially generate the maximum return that they can for investors. These companies don't have any control over who owns a majority of their company, right? And people got to understand this stuff, right? They got to understand this stuff. Now, the problem with this, the issue with this is that, yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that these companies are using their large ownership stake to push a woke agenda, right? To push ESG or whatever. And I think that's legitimate criticism. That's a legitimate conversation to be had, right? But when Vivek was asked that question, as somebody that used to work in financial services, I could tell he was super annoyed by it because he would not be asked that question by anybody with a basic level of knowledge in regards to how capital markets and finance works, okay? So I understand some of the pains he's going through, right, when he's talking to some of these people. And this is going to be a similar situation here with Mehdi Hassan, who's going to ask Vivek how he made his money, right? And also is going to ask Vivek about comments that he made about Mike Pence and what he would have done differently on January 6th. So I want to react to it. But again, I highly recommend people watch this whole interview. I can't react to the whole thing because it's 25 minutes. It's too long. But I highly recommend people watch this whole interview because this is clearly Vivek's toughest interview and his most heated debate. I mean, this went off the rails. I mean, this dude, he almost snapped, right? He almost snapped. So let's get into it.
So you talk about your business background. Let's talk about that. You made your name and made a lot of your early big money from pushing an Alzheimer's drug that had already failed 4 clinical trials when you bought it. You then talked it up on CNBC, in Forbes, on the cover. Your company's subsidiary shot up by billions in value when it went public in 2015. But then the drug failed its phase 3 trial on your watch. The company lost 75% of its value in a single day. Ordinary investors like the California State Teachers Pension Fund lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you cashed out beforehand via your parent company to the tune of, I believe, over $37 million. Your critics say it's a classic pump and dump scheme. What do you say to them?
Yeah, Mehdi, that's the standard opposition research during politics reading line. Anybody in the biotech industry knows this story very well. 99.7% of Alzheimer's drugs have failed. That's thousands of drugs. Mine was one of them. But the company I founded, Roivant, developed a range of medicines. And the way I made my money was not through the failure of that Alzheimer's drug. This is one of the pieces of misinformation from opposition research. I could have sold shares in that subsidiary Alzheimer's company, but didn't. So the person who was hurt by that was me.
Hold on. But you say this a lot, but you did sell shares in Roivant, and you made $37 million.
And Mehdi,
$37 million.
Mehdi, I think you owe it to your audience. Mehdi, I think you owe it to your audience to be accurate. That is shares in a different company, not Axovant. And those shares that I sold are worth and those shares are worth dramatically more today. So I would have made more money had I held on to those shares. So
yeah, let me explain exactly what's going on here, because this is what I'm talking about in regards to people punching above their weight, trying to pretend that they know what they're talking about when they don't. And Mehdi actually probably does know what he's talking about. He just thinks that his audience is dumb, right? I don't think you guys are dumb, but I'm going to explain to you why this is totally normal and this is not something to be concerned about. This is not anybody being a snake oil salesman. It's not a scam. It's not a pump and dump, okay? So I'm going to give you guys a very simple explanation in regards to why this is perfectly normal and what happened with Vivek's company, okay, and how he actually made money. So Vivek started this company called Roivant, which essentially creates smaller companies, subsidiaries, to develop drugs for certain diseases, okay? So he may create a subsidiary or a smaller company through Roivant that, for example, helps treat Alzheimer's, okay? And that company was Axovant, okay? The drug, that was the name of the drug, that was the name of the company, okay? So Vivek does not have direct ownership in Axovant, okay? It's through a larger company that he has ownership in and that he runs. So what happens in the pharmaceutical industry, as Vivek Ramaswamy is alluding to here, is that developing drugs is very risky. There's a high failure rate, extremely high. However, investors bet millions and millions and millions of dollars that a drug is going to be successful, even though they know more than likely that it's not going to be, that it's going to fail. They do this because the return on investment, if the drug is successful, is going to justify the risk, okay? Because if you put in millions of dollars, there's a good chance you're going to make billions if the drug actually is able to go to market. And pharmaceuticals, the pharmaceutical industry, there's so much red tape that it literally costs hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a drug. So he raised hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a drug based off the thesis that there are drugs that are being put on the shelf by larger pharmaceutical companies, like, for example, Pfizer. Okay, they put a drug on the shelf for Alzheimer's that failed their clinical trials. However, Vivek's hypothesis was that, well, some of these drugs have potential, they just need more development, right? This is public information. All the information about the clinical trials, the history of the drug, all publicly available for investors to see. So investors, with all this information, this previous knowledge of this drug, knew what they were putting their money into. They knew what they were putting their hundreds of millions of dollars into with the bet that the drug would ultimately work. However, it did not work, okay? And a lot of people lost money on it, including Vivek Ramaswamy, who did not sell Roivant's shares in Axovant. So Roivant actually lost money. However, how Vivek made money is that he sold shares in Roivant, which is a different company. It's the parent company, but it's a different company. He sold shares in Roivant and generated capital gains. Okay. And that's, how he made millions of dollars. But you got to understand, although Roivant owned Axovant and Axovant was a bust, they also owned multiple other subsidiaries, and the stock price, the value of Roivant, was not solely dependent on what would happen with Axovant. Okay, people got to understand that he's developed other drugs as well too through Roivant. Okay, and Roivant's stock price was basically a reflection of where investors, or how much investors thought the company was worth. And as Vivek mentions, he actually would have made more money had he not sold shares in Roivant before Axovant crashed and burned into the dirt. He actually would have made more money because Roivant went on to become a more valuable company in the future, despite what happened with Axovant, right? So again, it's not his fault, right? But people actually really do need to educate themselves on these topics before they jump to conclusions about somebody's background and what they did, because what this man did, that's not something that the average person is going to understand. They're not going to get. But it's not unusual. It's not out of the ordinary. It's not a pump and dump. It is literally the standard, right? This is what happens in the pharmaceutical industry when it comes to developing drugs. This is what happens with startups as well too. Again, the reason why I know this is because I worked in the financial services industry, and also in college, I studied entrepreneurship, which means I studied startups. I literally studied how startups and seed funding works. Okay, I understand how somebody can get rich even if their company fails, because I understand how this stuff works. I studied it. So again, this is why I'm explaining it to you guys, because it's not sketchy. Like, there's nothing sketchy about it. There's a reason why he hasn't been sued by anybody, right? There hasn't been somebody coming out of the woodwork talking about, well, this guy scammed me out of my money, because he didn't scam anybody out of their money. This is perfectly normal stuff, okay? So let's continue.
Don't believe what the opposition research pervades through the media.
It's not opposition research. We looked at your tax returns, which you